questions if they're having any challenges. And then we'll come back and we'll start the recording again, and we'll record the modeling. And at the end of this webinar, you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint, the video, and anything we create in the model. So we're going to have a look at developing personalized learning using ACARA's case model. So as we look through it, interestingly enough, ACARA has recently changed their graphics around the case model. So rather than the linear model, they've changed it to look like this. But fundamentally, there are 4 parts to the model of providing personalized learning in classrooms. The first element starts with the curriculum, which are, in this case, the content descriptions that are being taught, and that process of deconstructing them to ensure that you're only teaching the essential knowledge and modeling the essential skills. Then we move on to the standards element of the model, where we think about what are the strengths and the barriers to learning or functional impacts of all the students in our class, as well as specific individuals with disability and diverse learning needs. Then we move into the standards element of the model, which refers to the achievement standards that relate to the content descriptions, and we're deconstructing those to ensure that we're only having the students demonstrate what they actually need to demonstrate in relation to the achievement standards. We're not adding those, what we might call construct irrelevant variables as part of that, and we're going to deconstruct the achievement standards together. And the final part of the model is that evaluation element, where we look at evaluating not only the planning process, but how it was actually implemented within the classroom, and looking at what went well and what could be done better, and what we will change for future cycles of teaching and learning. This is the new graphic, but actually I prefer the old one, which was more of a linear model. Exactly the same process. We plan the content descriptions and we deconstruct those to ensure that we're only teaching the essential knowledge and then modeling the essential skills. Then we take into account the strengths and barriers to learning for our whole class, as well as specific individuals with disability and diverse learning needs. Then we look at the achievement standards and we deconstruct those to ensure that students only have to demonstrate what the achievement standards are asking. But it's also that idea that students won't necessarily just demonstrate the achievement standards of their year level. They might demonstrate higher or lower, and that's okay as part of this model, so that knowledge of achievement standards at different year levels, because often when you look at individual curriculum plans, or what we might refer as alternative assessment tasks for lower or higher year levels, the assumption is that we look at the achievement standard of that student's year level, and then we just assume what a student at a lower level would be able to do, or higher level. Whereas the model actually advocates that we go to the achievement standards of those year levels. So if I'm teaching and assessing year 7, and I've got a student working at year 4, I go to the year 4 achievement standard. The model advocates that we always teach the content descriptors of the year level, but students can demonstrate along the achievement standard spectrum, and we'll give that a go later on today. And the final element of that model is to evaluate how things went, what are the strengths of the process and what are the challenges, and looking at how we can improve it for future cycles. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through each one of those steps now, and I'll model out and talk to you through the process, and then we'll give you time to do it yourself. So you'll walk away with things that you can use in your classroom. So in step 1, when we look at the curriculum or the content descriptions, we're looking at what we are teaching in the Australian curriculum, either version 9 or version 8.4, and deconstructing that to ensure that when we teach those content descriptions, we're only teaching the essential knowledge and modeling the essential skills. There is that risk as a teacher that if I'm teaching history and I love history, adding those things that I'm really passionate about, but if they're actually not there in the curriculum, that could be a potential barrier to the learning process for students. So when we're talking about the content descriptions, we're talking about the curriculum element of that model, or the content element of the old model. So when we look at the case model and the description provided by ACARA, it talks about starting with the learning area content which aligns to the student's chronological age, planning appropriate teaching and learning, developing those rigorous programs by ensuring that we're teaching the knowledge of the content descriptor and modeling their skills, not adding things that aren't there or taking things away, and ensuring that all students progress. Here's the definition of the content descriptions from the Australian Curriculum ACARA. Often when I work with schools, sometimes there's that misunderstanding that I teach the content descriptors and I assess them, but actually in the Australian curriculum, I teach the content descriptors or descriptions and I assess the achievement standards. So sometimes there's a disconnect or a bit of a difference between the two, and that's really important to know. So what we need to do to ensure that we rigorously teach the content descriptions are to follow a number of steps, and we're going to do that today. So we're going to determine the content descriptors that are going to be taught in the Australian curriculum. So we'll copy those across to a Word document. We're going to highlight that key terminology and cognitive verbs. So we're going to define them using the glossaries. I prefer 8.4 because version 9 the content the glossaries are still being added to. So I do a lot of work with ACARA, and in one conversation I asked why the glossaries from version 9 weren't as comprehensive as 8.4, and the explanation was they're still being fleshed out. Then to further flesh out those content descriptions, we're going to look at the elaborations. And when you look at the elaborations in the content descriptions, it says that elaborations are optional, but I like to think of them as providing you boundaries of what is acceptable. Interestingly enough, in 8.4, there was a document hidden in the internet saying that all content description elaborations are optional, but in version 9.4, it's very explicit about that. Once we've done that, we need to work out what is the essential knowledge that we need to teach in the content descriptions, and then we need to determine what are the essential skills, and then if relevant, we create any scaffold. So what we're going to do now, we're going to jump onto version 9 of the curriculum, and we're going to jump into a Word document, and we're going to give this a go, and I'll model it out for you, and then we'll get you to give it a go. Because we've got teachers who teach different year levels and different curriculum areas, we might stick with English because in Queensland, Australian teachers are rolling out version 9 of the Australian curriculum in English. We'll have a look at that. And because we've got different teachers who teach different year levels, we might stick with year 7. So I'm going to bring up Australian curriculum, and we'll go to English, and we'll go to year 7. If you haven't played around much with version 9 of the curriculum, I like it a lot more than version 8.4. A couple of reasons is, here's the achievement standards that students need to demonstrate. In version 8.4, you chose your achievement standards, then you had to go and find the relevant content descriptions. In version 9, each one of these achievement standards are hyperlinked. So you simply click on it and it'll take you to the content descriptions that you need to teach to get the kids there. So when choosing the content descriptions, it's kind of a backward approach. You first need to think about the achievement standards that you're going to assess. So I want to focus on 2. This read, view, and comprehend text created to inform, influence, or engage audiences. And students create written or multimodal text, including literary text for different purposes and audience, expressing and expanding on ideas with evidence. So I'll start by doing this one to find the content descriptions. So once I click on this achievement standards, it highlights in yellow all the content descriptions that I teach to get the students to that achievement standard. And here we've got 5, 8, 13 content descriptions. What is interesting here is, whilst there's a lot of content descriptions for one achievement standard, you'll find a number of content descriptions overlap in terms of different achievement standards. Also, whilst there's a lot here, in other achievement standards, there might be one achievement standard to one content description. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take each one of these content descriptions, and I'm going to put them onto a Word document. So can I get you to do the same? Can I get you to go to whatever learning area you want to focus on in version 9? Go to the year level in the learning area, click on the achievement standard, and then go to the content descriptors and copy and paste those to a Word document. I'll do that while you do yours. It might take me a little while since there are 13 here. So I'm just going to copy and paste each one of them, and I'll call you back once I've done that. All right, I'll give you a couple more minutes to do that, and then I'll call you back, and then I'll model for you the next step. All right, everyone, how about we come back and have a look at the next step in deconstructing these content descriptions. So what we need to do now that we've copied them across, we need to highlight any key terminology or any cognitive verbs. So I find that the easy way to do this is when I highlight them, so understand, and I go through here and look for understand any other time, and I color code it the same. It just allows me to differentiate the knowledge and skills that I need to focus on. If I have a look here, identify, which is the lowest level skill in the Australian curriculum. It also goes all the way to year 10. So let's have a look. Identify again. We won't focus on all of them because I'll get you to do this for yourself. And while you do yours, I'll do mine as well. Let's highlight these three. So I need to define these. I like to just create my own little glossary. So to ensure that I'm ticking accurately, I need to define, understand, identify, and explain. So color coding them, as I said, makes that process a bit easier as we work through it. Oh, wrong color. So now we're going to have a look at the definitions. We're going to go to the ACARA glossaries to define these. So as I said, I prefer use version 8.4 glossary. So I'm going to bring up version 8.4 of the Australian curriculum. So 8.4. So I'm going to use the glossaries from this. So if I were doing English, I'll start with the English glossary. To find that, all I need to do is go below the content information and I move into understand how English works. And I come to the very bottom where the glossary is. So understand, I'm going to look. There's no definition of understand, which is interesting because it's used in the content descriptors. Let's have a look for identify. No identify. Let's have a look for explain. Interestingly enough, none of the key terminology used in those content descriptions are actually in the English glossary. And my experience working with schools is if it's not in the glossary, teachers then decide it's time to make it up themselves. Interestingly enough, from my experience, most of the terminology used in the content descriptions and the achievement standards aren't in the glossary of that curriculum area. The best one is HPE. I can't explain why. Maybe because HPE doesn't have the content knowledge that other areas do, so they have the skills defined. So if we go to understand how HPE works and we come to glossary, so let's start with understand. There's the definition of understand. So we'll put it into our document because that's what we need to teach the students and model for the students. Let's have a look. Let's find the definitions of identify. Here's the lowest level skill in the Australian curriculum, to recognize or name someone or something. Let's find explain. So I've started the process by highlighting the key terminology in either the, knowledge or the cognitive verbs of the skills, and then going to the glossary and defining them. Have a look at the definition of explain to provide additional extra information that demonstrates understanding, application, or reasoning. So, interestingly enough, explain is not just regurgitate what the teacher said or taught. If that was the case, if a student just simply regurgitated what the teacher taught for the cognitive verb explain, they actually wouldn't be demonstrating that skill. Explain is showing that they understand it by demonstrating something different. So what I want you to do now, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do it. I want you to highlight the key terminology. So analyze, explain, then the ones that you chose in your content descriptors, and then define them by putting them into your glossary. I'll put a timer on for 10 minutes, then we'll come back and we'll look at the next steps in this process of deconstructing the content descriptors. So I'm going to continue to work on this. And if you have any questions, please put your mic on and just call out and we'll have a look at that. But I'll give you 10 minutes. I'll put 10 minutes on the timer, highlight the cognitive verbs or key terminology, and then define them using the glossaries. And then I'll call you back in 10 minutes and we'll move on to the next step. And I'll keep on doing this one so that you can see what I'm doing as well. So you can see what I've done with the content descriptions. I've gone through, highlighted the key terminology and cognitive verbs. Then using the glossaries, I've gone through and defined what they mean because that's what I'm modeling and scaffolding for my students to do. You still got 7 minutes to go. You keep on doing that, and then I'll call you back and we'll show you the next step. Three more minutes and we'll come back together. All right, everyone, let's come back. What we're going to do now is we're going to just focus on this one content description as an example, and then I'll get you to practice with it with some that you choose. So identify and explain the ways that characters, settings, and events combine to create meaning and narrative. So let's have a look at our definitions. We've got identify and explain. So identify is name or recognize something or someone. Explain is to provide additional information that demonstrates understanding, application, or reasoning. Create is to invent or design a movement sequence, plan, or idea. So we need to teach students to name and recognize and provide additional information to demonstrate understanding, application, or reasoning, the ways that characters, settings, and events combine to develop meaning and narratives. So those definitions help us flesh out those content descriptions, but what we can now further do before we work out what is the essential knowledge and skills is go back to the Australian curriculum and find that one content description. And what we can do is we can go to the elaborations and have a look at what they say. They give us that more idea to flesh these out. So analyzing and explaining the ways that structure and features of short stories, discussing purpose and appeal of different authorial choices, exploring traditional stories from Asia and discussing their features. So it doesn't provide us a lot, but let's go back to our Word document. So if we're going to work out what our essential knowledge and skills are, I always like to use tables. So essential knowledge. So this is the essential knowledge we're teaching and the essential skills that we're modeling. And as we do this, we start to flesh out our lessons. So we need to look at characters in stories. So that's knowledge, settings in stories, events in stories. And then how characters, settings, settings and events combine. So that's our knowledge. So that's what we're really teaching the students. Then our skills are to name or recognize the events, settings, and characters, and provide additional information about how these create meaning in the narrative. Interestingly enough, one thing I've put out here is what is a narrative is an essential part of that knowledge. So as we look at this, identify and explain the ways that characters, settings, and events. Let me put this down a bit so it's a bit easy to see. The ways that characters, settings, and events combine to create meaning in narratives. So what is the essential knowledge we need to teach? What is a narrative? Characters in stories, settings in stories, events in stories, and how character, settings, and events combine to create meaning. That's our knowledge. Essential skills, name or recognizing the events, settings, and characters in the narrative, and provide additional information about how these create meaning in the narratives. So what we've done now is we've worked out what is that essential knowledge I need to teach and what is the essential skills I need to model. Interestingly enough, when we look at the content descriptors and we elaboration, it didn't dictate the narratives that we use. So when we choose those narratives, we'd be thinking about what engages our kids and what could we use that has these things. So the narratives we choose have to have characters, settings, and events. And that's the important part of that process. But by doing this, that fleshes out what is it that essentially we have to teach in terms of the knowledge to our kids, and what is essentially that we're modeling for our students. This is one content description. We'd have to do this for each one of these content descriptions. But what is really good by doing this is remembering that some of these content descriptions hit multiple achievement standards. Once it's done, it's done. So as I go through and do for each one of these content descriptions and break them down, it helps me plan for other achievement standards in my planning. So what I'm going to get you to do, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I want you to choose a couple of the content descriptions that you've identified and define the cognitive verbs and key terminology. Then pull them out, have a look at the elaborations. Remember, they are optional, but they give you ideas. And I want you to work out what is the essential knowledge that you need to teach and what are the essential skills that you need to model. Then we'll have a look at how we could create this into a scaffold, and then we'll move on to the next part of the case model. So I'll give you 10 minutes, I'll put it on the timer, and I'll keep on working on this, and then I'll call us back and we'll continue on. See you in 10 minutes. All right, let's come back. So what we've done to date is taken out the content description, highlighted the key terminology and cognitive verbs, defined them. Then we've taken one specific content description, and by defining, using the definitions and looking at the elaborations, we've identified the essential knowledge to be taught and essential skills to be modeled. I've also done it with this one, use comprehension strategies such as visualizing, predicting, connecting, summarize, monitoring, questioning, inferring to analyze and summarize information and ideas. I looked at the elaborations. It talked about formal speeches, informal speeches, covers of books, paragraphs and chapters, and extended text. And what is interesting is for the essential skills is think about a group of English teachers. If you said to a group of teachers, what is comprehension? Often when I work with them, they'll say make meaning or tell me what it's about. Interestingly enough, the Australian curriculum defines comprehension strategies. So we've got definition here. So these are the skills that you're modeling and scaffolding for kids. The final step in this deconstructing the content descriptions is when it's relevant, creating possible scaffolds that you could use to model those skills for the students. So let's go back to this: identify and explain the ways that characters, settings, and events combine to create meaning and narratives. So we need to identify, name, or recognize characters, settings, and events and narratives and how these are combined. And then we need to explain how do these create meaning in the narrative. So what's important here is we're thinking about how we could scaffold this thinking for the kids. So as we read through collaboratively with the narrative, it's that idea of highlighting characters, putting them into that scaffold, highlighting elements of the setting, events in the narrative, and then identifying how they're combined, and then explaining how do these create meaning in the narrative. And remember, explain is not regurgitate. So it's that process of, okay, we know this, but I need to give something more to demonstrate that I understand. So what am I going to give you to do? I'm going to give you 10 more minutes to give that a go, identify the essential knowledge and identify the essential skills, and then think about, is there any possible scaffolds that you could create for your students when you're modeling to provide them with that help with that process? When we come back in 10 minutes, we're going to move on from the C part of the case model. I'm going to move into the A part or the abilities part of the model, and then we'll continue that on. So I'll call you back in 10 minutes and we'll go from there.